I'm 75 now, and I can't remember anybody except the Queen being.
The announcement did not arrive with ceremony. There were no trumpets, no gathered courtiers, and no reassuring appearance from the palace balcony. Instead, King Charles placed his signature beneath a carefully prepared declaration and confirmed the decision that would shake the monarchy. Camilla would no longer hold or use the position of queen. But before the palace could explain why, her private emotional statement escaped into the public domain and revealed a marriage already breaking beneath the crown. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles stared at the declaration after signing it, knowing the ink had separated his marriage from the institution he had sworn to protect. The formal declaration, a written order recording the sovereign's decision, set a constitutional transition before Camilla would cease acting as queen. It did not end their marriage. It removed the authority she had spent decades enduring humiliation to reach. Camilla sat alone in a morning room when an aide entered with the document. Her teacup remained untouched. She gripped the table and asked whether Charles had hesitated before signing. The aide lowered his eyes. His silence told her enough. Minutes earlier, paragraphs from her handwritten statement had reached the press before the palace could release its announcement. Camilla described herself as discarded at the moment loyalty should have mattered most. Those words turned a royal restructuring into a personal wound, suggesting the king had promised to protect her and reversed himself after a confidential family meeting. Charles read the final message twice. His private secretary urged him to delay publication until he had spoken with his wife, but the monarch set down his pen and refused. Delay, he said, would deepen the confusion threatening the crown, the permanent institution represented by the sovereign, rather than one marriage. Then the danger widened. Officials learned that the leaked passage belonged to a longer letter, and several pages were missing. One unseen paragraph described what Charles had told Camilla the previous night. Another referred to William, Princess Anne, and constitutional advisors who had gathered before the decision. William received a sealed copy at Adelaide Cottage. He read the first page without moving, then asked, "Has she seen the full reason?" The question exposed a threat. Camilla had lost the title, but she still did not know what evidence had persuaded Charles to take it away. As Camilla struggled to understand how the title had vanished so quickly, attention turned toward the three people who had entered this crisis, carrying completely different wounds and completely different reasons for believing the decision had become unavoidable. Behind the declaration stood three people bound by family, but separated by memory. Charles saw a monarchy he feared could fracture under another scandal. Camilla saw the final reward for years of humiliation being taken from her without mercy. William saw an institution drifting toward a crisis his father seemed unable to contain. Each believed they were protecting something sacred, yet only one of them would keep the power to define what protection truly meant. Charles had defended Camilla for years, often at a cost he rarely admitted. He had asked the country to accept her, and the palace to treat their marriage as settled history. Now the crown, the enduring institution carried by the sovereign, demanded distance from the woman he had promised never to abandon publicly. His pain did not come from a lack of love. It came from knowing that love and duty had become enemies. Camilla felt the change before anyone explained it. An equerry entered and reached for the red dispatch box, the locked case used to carry official royal papers. She watched him lift it from her desk, then asked whether her household would be reduced. When he admitted that a staffing review had already begun, her sadness turned into disbelief. The title was not merely disappearing. The life built around it was being dismantled. William carried a different fear. He believed blurred authority around Camilla could weaken Catherine's future position and poison the handover to his reign. The prince also remembered what loyalty to the institution had cost his mother, and he refused to let silence create another private wound beneath public ceremony. Yet he had never demanded Camilla's removal. He had shown Charles conflicting instructions issued by her household, and asked whether two centers of power were forming inside one monarchy. The telephone rang in the king's room. Charles watched it from beside the window, knowing who was calling, but he could not answer. When the sound stopped, he pressed one hand against the desk and whispered that hearing her voice might make him reverse a decision the monarchy could not survive without. Princess Anne had already warned him against compromise. She insisted that any ruling affecting the dignity of the crown must be written, signed, and irreversible. Anne believed delay would turn private confusion into public collapse. Camilla reread her leaked statement, folded it carefully, and stood. She ordered her senior aide to clear the corridor to Charles's study. She would no longer accept explanations through officials. But before husband and wife could face each other across the most painful decision of their marriage, the palace would be forced to revisit the precise incident that turned years of tension into a point of no return. Every royal crisis has a moment that appears insignificant until history looks backward. In this case, it was not a parliamentary debate or a public scandal. It was a closed memorial ceremony, a disputed chair, and an instruction delivered in the king's name that Charles claimed he had never given. Those present remembered the silence that followed. They remembered William's expression. Most of all, they remembered Camilla refusing to step aside when the future of the crown entered the room. Tension had built for months. Camilla's household had started issuing instructions about seating, patronages, ceremonial access, and senior family appearances. A royal household is the team managing a royal figure's duties. Yet palace departments could no longer tell whether those orders reflected her personal wishes or direct authority from Charles. Senior aides urged the king to define the boundary in writing. He delayed, believing public unity mattered more than internal precision. Then St. George's Chapel changed everything. During a private memorial service, Camilla's office ordered Catherine's designated chair moved behind hers and claimed the alteration had been approved by Charles. The chapel, a royal place of worship at Windsor, carried deep symbolic weight. William questioned the arrangement, but an official repeated that the command had come from the sovereign. William waited until the service ended. He placed the written instruction before his father and watched Charles circle the line bearing his authority. The king said he had never approved it. The prince stayed calm. He asked who was now permitted to speak in the monarch's name. Charles confronted Camilla that evening. She insisted the chair had been moved to reflect her rank, not to humiliate Catherine. The queen consort argued that ceremonial order had always followed hierarchy. When he warned that his name could not be used without permission, she answered that he had given her the position, but never the freedom to occupy it. Anne arrived with worse. She produced a memorandum, an internal note, showing that Camilla's household had also tried to delay a joint engagement involving William and Catherine. Again, the paper cited the king's wishes. Again, Charles had no memory of approving it. The pattern could no longer be dismissed. Charles secretly commissioned a constitutional and household review, an examination of whether royal authority was being used safely. When the completed file reached him, its first recommendation was devastating: remove Camilla's title before two centers of power became impossible to control. That recommendation remained hidden until the morning Charles signed it, but once Camilla learned which ceremony had been used to justify her removal, she entered his study, determined to make him choose between the official record and the woman standing before him. There were no advisors in the room when Camilla entered, no constitutional experts, no private secretaries prepared to translate pain into careful language. There was only Charles behind his desk, the signed declaration between them, and the woman who had spent much of her life waiting to stand beside him. She did not begin by asking why she had lost the title. She asked why the man who once promised to protect her had allowed strangers to tell her first. Camilla dismissed the equerry outside the study and closed the door herself. An equerry is a royal aide who assists with official and personal duties, but no aide could protect either of them now. Charles had cleared the room because allowing officials to mediate would make the betrayal colder. This argument belonged to a husband and wife, even if the crown stood between them. Charles told her the declaration would not end their marriage. She would remain his wife and retain a senior place within the family, but she would no longer act as queen or control a separate household capable of issuing commands under his authority. The queen consort listened without moving. Then she began listing everything she had endured. Camilla reminded him of the hostility, the public shame, and the years spent entering rooms where people refused to accept her. Her voice broke as she said she had survived being treated as an outsider because Charles promised that one day she would no longer have to defend her place beside him. Now he had taken that place away with a signature. Charles did not deny her suffering. He admitted that he had failed her long before the declaration was signed. The king had allowed affection to replace boundaries, leaving her with a position powerful enough to attract expectation, but vague enough to become dangerous. By refusing to define her authority, he had exposed his wife and endangered the unity he was sworn to preserve. Then he revealed the review's decisive finding. Instructions issued by Camilla's household had created the appearance of independent royal authority. The danger was no longer only what she intended. It was what officials believed they were required to obey. Camilla demanded to know whether William had threatened to abandon royal duties. Charles answered that his son had made no threat. The final pressure came from his own realization that silence was placing his wife, his heir, and the monarchy on opposing sides. Camilla removed a small insignia linked to her position and placed it beside the declaration. She told Charles that if he wished to separate the crown from their marriage, he would now discover whether their marriage could survive without the crown holding it together. The door closed behind her, but the conflict did not remain private, because the authority behind Charles's decision was already moving through the palace, rewriting households, canceling instructions, and revealing who truly controlled the royal machine. The world saw Charles's signature, but signatures rarely act alone. Behind the declaration stood a network of advisors, family members, constitutional guardians, and household officials who had spent weeks preparing for the possibility that the king would finally act. Yet the most decisive pressure did not come from parliament or public opinion. It came from within the family, from those who believed affection had been allowed to blur the line between royal companionship and sovereign command. Camilla's independent office entered immediate review. Ceremonial correspondence, patronage approvals, staffing powers, and scheduling decisions moved back to the sovereign's central household, the main team responsible for carrying out the monarch's official authority. The transfer mattered because her staff could no longer issue instructions carrying the weight of the crown. Every order would now pass through one center of command. Princess Anne took control of the first internal meeting after the declaration. She told officials to act without cruelty, but also without confusion. Anne understood that humiliation would deepen the personal wound, while hesitation would encourage rival interpretations. The change had to be dignified. It also had to be unmistakable. Charles remained seated after everyone left. The implementation papers lay untouched before him as his sister quietly poured water and waited. The king finally admitted that he had protected the institution by injuring the woman who had stood beside him when much of the country rejected them both. Anne did not comfort him with an easy answer. She reminded her brother that delayed pain often became greater pain. William received confirmation that the restructuring had begun, but he showed no satisfaction. Catherine watched him reread the message before setting it aside. The prince told his wife that removing Camilla's title might settle the constitutional danger while creating a family wound that could survive for generations. Catherine answered that clarity could prevent future damage, but it could not make the present suffering disappear. Then the security review changed the crisis again. Investigators found that Camilla's emotional statement had not been stolen from Charles's office. Someone had photographed it after the letter circulated among her closest advisors. The leak had come from inside her own circle. Time to expose her pain, just as the palace announced her removal. Charles received the complete handwritten letter privately. In the missing passage, Camilla wrote that she feared becoming invisible to the man who had once called her essential more than she feared losing the title itself. The words struck harder than any public accusation. The king locked the letter inside his desk and summoned Camilla's communications secretary. He now suspected the leak had been designed not simply to shame him, but to force a public reversal. Yet while Charles searched for the hand behind the leak, Camilla was already confronting a more immediate reality. Doors that had opened at her arrival were closing, invitations were being rewritten, and the palace had begun behaving as though her reign had already ended. The loss of a royal title is not felt in a single announcement. It arrives through smaller wounds. A chair is removed. A diary is altered. An aide who once waited outside the door no longer appears. For Camilla, the new reality became undeniable when she entered a planning meeting she had chaired for years and found her name missing from the agenda. No one asked her to leave. That made the humiliation worse. The room simply continued as though she had never commanded it. Camilla watched officials revise her place at future state events. She could still attend beside Charles as his wife, but she would no longer receive separate sovereign honors, lead formal processions, or approve arrangements reserved for the queen. Sovereign honors are ceremonial privileges granted through the monarch's authority, and losing them meant her presence would remain visible while her power disappeared. Palace staff began preparing a respectful alternative title for her use. Every invitation, seating plan, patronage record, and household directory required correction. The change mattered because even one unclear document could suggest that she still possessed authority the king had removed. Camilla entered a Commonwealth reception meeting and noticed the chair card where her royal designation had once appeared. A blank placeholder sat there instead. She traced its edge with one finger, excused herself calmly, and reached the corridor before her control broke. Her longtime dresser found her sitting alone and asked whether the ceremonial clothing should be packed away. Camilla answered that there was little reason to preserve garments for appearances she would never lead. The aide knelt beside her and said her service had never depended on a crown, a procession, or a title. She had stayed for the woman beneath them. Then betrayal entered the room. Camilla's communications secretary requested a private conversation and confessed through a documented internal statement that she had released part of the emotional letter. The aide believed public sympathy would force Charles to delay the decision. Instead, she had turned her employer's most vulnerable words into a weapon. Camilla's sadness became fury. She told the secretary that protection without permission was not loyalty, it was control. Charles offered to describe the leak as an external security breach, shielding his wife's office from public scandal. Camilla refused. Another lie, she warned, would prove every accusation made against her household and destroy whatever credibility remained. Camilla held out her hand for the secretary's palace identification card and placed it inside a drawer. With visible sorrow, she dismissed the aide and said, loyalty without consent was merely another form of betrayal. Then she requested one final private conversation with William. For the first time since the crisis began, Camilla was no longer fighting to recover the crown. She was preparing to speak directly to the man she believed had inherited both the monarchy's future and its deepest suspicions about her. Camilla and William had spent years mastering the language of polite distance. Their public smiles were measured, their conversations brief, and their most painful memories left untouched. But when they met privately after the declaration, neither brought an aide. There were no papers on the table, and no official agenda to hide behind. Camilla began with an accusation. William answered with a confession. By the time the conversation ended, the title had not been restored, but the meaning of its loss had changed. Camilla chose a small family sitting room rather than his residence or her apartments. That neutral ground mattered, because neither would appear to summon, command, or submit to the other. William arrived alone and remained standing until she asked him to sit. She opened by accusing him of turning years of suspicion into a punishment his father had been too weak to resist. William did not retreat. He told Camilla that he had never asked Charles to remove her title. The prince had demanded a clear chain of authority, meaning a simple order showing which household had the final right to issue commands. Without it, staff could use one royal office against another, while Catherine could enter a future reign already damaged by battles she had not created. Camilla listened, then named the shadow they had both avoided. She said she had always known Diana's memory stood between them. Every attempt to establish dignity, she admitted, had sometimes become a desperate effort to prove she was more than the woman blamed for his childhood pain. The queen consort had wanted acceptance so badly that authority began to feel like protection. William lowered his voice. He confessed that his silence had never meant acceptance. It came from fear that honest words would reopen wounds no one in the family knew how to heal. The future king admitted that allowing suspicion to grow had made the final decision far more brutal than an earlier conversation might have been. Camilla then removed the original handwritten letter from her bag. She explained through her documented account that the leaked version was missing its final page. That page did not condemn Charles or William. It asked that Catherine never be forced to defend her legitimacy, as Camilla had defended her own. William read the words twice. He promised there would be no organized public humiliation during the transition, and no attempt to erase her charitable service. Her constitutional authority could end, but her years of work would remain in the official royal record. Camilla folded the letter and made her choice. She would not challenge Charles, release private correspondence, or permit supporters to fight in her name. She would issue one final statement herself, with every word chosen freely. When Camilla emerged from that room, she had lost none of the sadness but much of the anger, and the statement she prepared next would transform the public story from a royal power struggle into something far more human. By midday, the declaration had crossed every border. Commentators argued over constitutional authority, Broadcasters replayed the leaked words, and newspapers prepared editions that would define the crisis for generations. But the moment that captured public feeling was not the signature or the palace statement. It was Camilla, leaving Clarence House without royal insignia, pausing beside the waiting car, and turning back toward the doorway, as though silently acknowledging that the life she had spent decades reaching had ended behind her. Broadcasters called the decision an unprecedented separation of marriage from queenship. Queenship meant the public position, duties, and symbolic authority attached to being queen, and Charles had now separated those powers from his relationship with his wife. Constitutional experts debated whether the king had protected the succession or exposed how deeply emotion had entered the machinery of the monarchy. Anne moved quickly to control the palace response. She ordered staff to avoid anonymous briefings, triumphant language, or any suggestion that Camilla had been expelled from the family. The princess insisted the transition must be described as a constitutional correction, not a punishment. She knew one careless remark could turn private grief into open warfare. Public feeling hardened around one newspaper front page. Camilla's face appeared beneath the words, "The Queen who lost the crown," while a smaller image showed Charles signing the declaration. Copies were pressed against the railings outside Buckingham Palace, as crowds gathered in unusual silence. Some blamed the monarch, others believed he had acted too late. Camilla felt that judgment outside Clarence House. A longtime household employee began crying as she approached the waiting car. The former queen clasped the woman's hands and said, "We will not make this uglier than it already is." She then left without answering the questions being shouted toward her. Minutes later, Camilla released her authorized statement through a recorded message approved by her office. She accepted Charles's decision, expressed sorrow without accusation, and declared that the crown must remain larger than any individual's need for recognition. Its calm dignity stood in sharp contrast to the wounded letter that had been leaked without her consent. Charles read the message alone. Instead of issuing another cold institutional response, the king added a handwritten final sentence to the palace release. He thanked his wife for standing beside him through years of hostility and stated that losing the title did not erase his gratitude, loyalty, or affection. Then Charles summoned Camilla, William, Catherine, and Anne to a private chapel service, before the change became final. The gathering would not restore what had been taken. It would decide whether the family closed this chapter with bitterness or one last act of unity. The world had delivered its judgment in headlines and crowds, but the final verdict would not be written outside the palace. It would emerge inside a quiet chapel, where titles fell away, and the people beneath them faced what remained. The final morning arrived without spectacle. Camilla entered the chapel not as a triumphant queen and not as a defeated exile, but as a woman confronting the cost of a life intertwined with monarchy. Charles waited near the front. William and Catherine stood together several steps away. Anne watched in silence. No declaration was read. No apology was demanded. Yet in that small gathering, the family reached a verdict more lasting than any title. The crown would survive, but only after everyone surrendered something. Noon made the decision official. The revised palace register, the formal record listing royal titles and duties, removed Camilla's designation as queen from official use. Her separate constitutional functions ended, while a smaller household remained to provide personal support without exercising sovereign authority. The distinction mattered because affection could continue, but command could no longer remain unclear. Charles ordered permanent written boundaries between his office, his wife's household, and the team serving William and Catherine. The Prince and Princess of Wales are the senior heir and his wife, whose roles prepare them for the next reign. The reform ensured that no future royal partner could accidentally create a second center of power within the monarchy. Charles approached Camilla after the chapel emptied. He apologized for allowing confusion to grow until duty demanded public pain. The king admitted that his silence had made the final action crueler than honesty would have been. She answered that she could not forgive the method immediately, but she understood the reason. She would not spend the rest of their marriage fighting for a title already gone. William stepped forward without pretending the past had vanished. He thanked Camilla for refusing to deepen the crisis and promised that her charitable work would remain in the official record. The prince did not call their relationship healed. She did not ask him to. Their honesty mattered because recognition without false affection was more durable than another polished royal performance. Camilla removed the final insignia connected to her queenship, The emblem, a symbol showing official rank, could have been collected by an aide, but she placed it directly into Charles's hands. That choice transformed surrender into agency. The woman who had felt stripped of power chose the manner of her departure. The leaked statement no longer stood as proof of rebellion. It became evidence of private grief, while Camilla's authorized response defined her final act. She had possessed every reason to retaliate. Instead, she chose restraint. Charles proved that love could not override constitutional clarity. William protected the future without celebrating her fall. Camilla lost the crown, but not her place in history. She entered believing that queenship would vindicate every sacrifice she had made. She left understanding that her greatest dignity came from surrendering it without allowing the loss to destroy the family, the king, or herself. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.